So during World War II, the 101st Airborne Division was sent to Bastogne. The Nazis were pushing forward and they evacuated other soldiers and sent the 101st Airborne, a very tough division, forward. They were soon surrounded, and the Nazi commander sent word to the Americans and said, you need to surrender. Here are your terms. And they sent a one word response back, and it was one word that didn't make a lot of sense. It was nuts. Nuts, nuts. Before he sent that one word response back, he gathered his commanders and he said, "Gentlemen," or he gathered his officers. This was Colonel McCullough. Gathered his officers together and said, "Gentlemen, we have the greatest opportunity ever presented to an army in the field of battle. We can attack in any direction." That's the way he thought about it, which I think is fascinating. And but he's right. He could attack in any direction. It feels like that with the news today. Like there's just so much going on. And what I titled this was Ruski Mir, or actually Ruski Spring, right? Is there a Ruski Spring? Now, it looks like in some ways that all kinds of things are breaking positively for Putin. There was Trump's election and he didn't want Harris. There was what's going on in Romania with this particular president, or the Georgian election not too long ago, and they got their overthrown election through corruption, and now they're pressing their advantage. And all kinds of things are actually looking like they're positively happening for Putin, but then they're not. And that's the fascinating thing. Now, I'm going to get to your comments in just a moment. By the way, tell me where you're from. If you're in here, I'm curious where people are all over the world. I know that only about a third of my audience are Americans. And so I try to calibrate what I say and explaining the American system and that sort of thing. Like the electoral system here, which doesn't make sense to you, but I don't understand how two nobody parties in Romania are actually vying for place 1 and 2 right now. So we're all learning together. All right. So there's Georgia, there's Syria. Like, okay. So Israel, I think Russia liked that there was problems with Israel, but he doesn't like that there are problems in Syria because now that's going to take more of his time and attention and resources. So, um, yeah, so there's a lot of things going on right now that are not so healthy for Putin. Okay, so you're putting your where you're from in here. It's getting me a sense of where everybody's from. Thank you for joining me. If you have questions about anything, I'm happy to try to answer. I will try to answer the most recent. So after you put your question in, if you put your question in and then you cut and paste it so that you can put it in again, that's perfectly fine. That's free game. I'm a pretty bad live streamer. I know some people have robust systems where they can pop the question up on the screen and that sort of thing. I just try to answer whatever questions come my way, and I don't have really a great system. So whatever you put in the chat, I'll try to answer. But I really do think that it feels like a Ruski spring. Like a lot of things are breaking. Now, again, Putin sees himself at war with the West, like with the entire West. And if that's really what he thinks he's at war with, and at least in a hybrid sense, he's at war with the West, if not full on. So if that's the case, things are going wrong. And when things go wrong, it could go very wrong for Putin personally. Like he's in great danger. Okay, so welcome people. What are your questions? Tell me what you think here. And now let me also preface this. Last week was a rough ride for the ruble. I don't know that that means that the Russian economy is going to collapse. Now, in my estimation, the most likely scenario for ending the war is that there's some kind of economic or political triggering event in Russia that causes either collapse or a regime change or something along those lines. Not so much fighting on the battlefield. The fighting on the battlefield has to hold them off until something along those lines. That's just my take on it. It's my studied position, but it is I can't prove it. So I'm telling you that right up front. So if you have questions, please put them into the chat and I'll try to address them. Hello, Professor from Wawa, Canada. My parents still in Czech saying that Putin is sick, and many from their cousins and friends say the same. What do you think? So there's a lot of talk about this right now, about how Putin they're taking off. I highlighted this thing from Anton Gerashenko, I think it was that was talking about how they're taking off the timestamps of Putin's statements, and like that's a little weird. And he's been looking sick for some time, and so, but I don't know. I mean, I just don't know what I don't know, and I'm not willing to say something that is so speculative, like, "Oh yeah, Putin's dead," or what. I'm not willing to say anything like that. Um, that'll come out in time. Okay, the fact that Assad flew to Russia when Putin's body double was in Kazan proves body doubles. Well, I don't know that it does. Assad knows that he needs help, and he needs to be somewhere where he can get some help, and so he went right to the main source of his help. And and again, Putin doesn't have a lot to offer. Like, think about how tied up he is in Ukraine, which is why the what looks like a Maidan revolution, which started today's the anniversary of the Maidan, like a really kicking off in a significant way, which like there's not the Georgian people are aware now. They're aware that if they push back, there's not Russians aren't coming to help. They could theoretically try to reclaim their stolen territories. Who knows what'll happen with that? Okay. Let's see. I see more Romanians around here. Hello. And so I'm not sure I understand what's happening in Romania. So if you can tell me, I'd appreciate that, because this guy is new to me. And it, after all the Europeans and Canadians telling me your two-party system doesn't make sense, to pull from the two furthest, smallest little parties out there, and those are now the contenders. I I don't quite understand that one either, but okay, that's just me. All right. Let's see. My question, have I heard anything about Kadyrov having massed troops on the eastern border of Chechnya? I have not, but is there a movie scene or something coming up? Because what Kadyrov's troops tend to do really well are TikTok videos, and what they tend to do not so well are actually getting to the battle and fighting. Mark Halton said, "Why do you think Ukraine has held back from firing into Russia after the first time?" They haven't. They've actually hit things in Russia a number of times, Mark, and they've hit some significant things, some air defense, some oil refineries. They've hit some significant targets. Let's see, who else? The oligarchs must be feeling the pain. Are they going to react soon? I don't know if they're feeling the pain or the degree to which they're feeling the pain. Um, the head of the finance ministry, or whatever they call it in Russia, is was saying that this is all the ruble falling is because of speculators. I don't think it's speculators, because it's odd time for it to fall from speculators after right after sanctions. I don't think that that's what it is. Um, yeah, the Azers are reporting this. It would be near the northern border. It doesn't seem that the Kadyrov are for the Ukraine front. No, they never wanted to go to the Ukraine front because people die out there, and so they just want to look like TikTok warriors and be tough, or look tough. Bob Roberts says, "Do you think it would be a good idea for NATO to enter Ukraine? I believe there's a show of support by sending troops. It will force Russia to the table. That's a huge escalation." But there was a philosopher I highlighted yesterday or the day before that said, "Look, if Russia can change its nuclear doctrine unilaterally, why doesn't NATO just change their nuclear doctrine and say any country threatened with nuclear weapons, that's a NATO ally, we're going to provide them with nuclear weapons so that they're not threatened." Huh? How about that? I mean, like, if Russia can do this one way and just do that with impunity, the West should be able to do that with the same impunity. Like, so I'm not trying to like. Here's another really interesting thing. Nobody's trying to start World War III. Okay, so there are people that are saying, um, if you do this, this will cause World War III, and people with opposite positions saying, if you do this, this will cause World War III. Some are appeasing, and some are saying, no, push them back so it doesn't start it. But nobody's like, yay, let's start World War III. Nobody is saying that kind of thing, except maybe Solyov and other propagandists. If you watch these guys, they're the ones talking about we're going to nuke London and we're going to nuke Berlin, and right, that's where it comes from. Okay, let's see. There seems like a lot of air defense systems have been destroyed in Crimea. Why doesn't it seem like the idea of taking back Crimea has slowly died? Well, they're spread thin. They need the troops. They have, what was it that I saw this morning? Zelensky talking about, you're talking about lowering the age in Ukraine, but you've only equipped us for 2.5 of 10 regiments or whatever the grouping was, brigades or whatever it was, where we need the weapons so that we can send these other 7.5 troops into battle. But so that's the problem, not the lowering of age. They're really, um, when they, if they get to the point that they lower age, that's a really bad sign for Ukrainian strength. But they probably do need to do that eventually if the war tarries. Okay. Or if the war carries on, rather. The oligarchs must be feeling the pain. Are they going to react soon? So somebody asked that earlier. This might be the same cut and paste, and that's fine. Perfectly fine to cut and paste. That's the rules in my live streams. Just keep, I'm going to try to get to the questions at the end, because trying to track all the way up, I don't have moderators in here doing things, and I'm kind of bad at this. So the ruble went to $1 to a 113, I think it was, and then it dropped back down to 107. But that still is pretty significant. It's the highest it's been since the beginning of the war. And the higher that number goes for Russia, the higher the number of rubles per dollar, the worse it is for the economy. So are oligarchs feeling it? Yes. Are they feeling it enough to risk their lives over it? Probably not. I mean, that's my estimation. Alex asked, "Do I think that Trump will bail out Putin?" I don't see it. I don't know. I can't see one way or another. My crystal ball is not murky enough, but a lot of rhetoric that came before the election was saying, "Yeah, Trump's just gonna bend over and kiss Putin's butt, and he's gonna do whatever Putin says." And I just don't think so. I think Trump is Trump, and he worships Trump, and so he's gonna do what looks like what makes Trump's legacy. Every president is consumed with their legacy. Trump was consumed with his legacy a long, long time ago, and he's going to want to go down in history as being this significant figure that brought peace, maybe, or but he's not going to be the one that wants to to look like he lost a war that we could have won, that we could have supported, that hurt democracy, that did those kind of things. John McElravy says, "Do you have any idea how much domestic military production Ukraine is doing outside of drones?" Yes, it's significantly ramped up in missile technology, drone technology primarily, but there's other things that they're building as well, shells and other ammunition. But if they can acquire, what they're trying to do is, if they can acquire it elsewhere, that's fine. But certain key things that they need to be able to carry on the war, they're trying to do on ground in Ukraine so that they can move forward. And ironically, what this is going to do is going to put a huge dent later on in the American defense industry, because Ukrainian defense industry is going to be built up and powerful. It's a fascinating thing to watch. If I was American defense contractors, I'd be making these, like, here's our technology. Let's do a deal so that we can work this out, and you can be our subcontractors in the future. Um, I mean, that would be the way to go in my estimation. Uh, I generally go right to the end, but I saw one from Lorenz that I wanted to answer along the way here. What do I think about the guy that Trump appointed for Ukraine? I think Keith Kellogg got a kind of black eye early on, when he was first announced. Ukrainian folks were flipping out because, hey, he's the guy who said that they would push him to the table by not giving them weapons, or giving them weapons if Russia didn't come to the table, and so they were upset about it. I think he's got his head screwed on straight. I don't know how. I don't know what I don't know, but he could and very likely will be positive for Ukraine, in the same way that I think Tulsi Gabbard could and very well likely be very bad for Ukraine. So, from what we can see from this point, I think he's positive. Uh, Good morning, Professor. Have a great day. Slava Ukraini. Well, Heroyam Slava. Um, Next says the oligarchs must be feeling the pain. Are they going to react soon? I don't think so. I think if you have a choice of keeping 80% of your wealth or your life, I would keep 80% of my wealth. I don't see any kind of overthrow. I think we're over optimistic in our jaded view of what's going on and what can actually happen. But I think bad things are happening for Putin all around the world, and he's overextended. And this is why I titled this as the Ruski Spring, perhaps, maybe. I mean, it's it's very, very difficult for him to hang on. Like he had his defense minister in North Korea trying to get more stuff from them yesterday, while he's trying to now have to deal with the headache of supplying Syria for Assad, who is a close ally. They don't want to lose that base in Syria, that's for sure. And yeah, so they've got their problems. Georgia, they won't be able to support any actions in Georgia. What's going on politically in Romania is a mess that could backfire and cause Romanians to double down on their support for Ukraine. So it's interesting to see how all these things play out. Loren says, hopefully Tulsi will not be confirmed. Pretty bad for American Western security. Yes, I think so. So if you look at the poly market, and I know some of you had this. Okay, so some things get spread in almost an echo chamber kind of environment, and people were saying poly market, that's predicting Trump. Oh, you can't believe that because it's predicting Trump. Listen, I'm telling you, while poly market could have been contaminated, prediction markets, and I usually pointed to predict it. That's the one that I prefer. But prediction markets, people are wagering their own money. That those are um, pretty reliable. All of their things being equal, as far as I can tell, and it's predicting that she has the least best chance of being confirmed of all the appointments. Of all the candidates that or the nominees that Trump has put forward, she has the least chance of being confirmed. John McElravy again. By the way, so I tell you the people that are at the very end is who I'm going to answer first. But if I know that you are a board member or a colleague or a graduate student or undergraduate student, please put that there as well. I will answer them. I'll give them priority just to say thank you because they were awesome enough to do that. John McElravy said, "We are hard pressed to apply free market concepts onto an isolated economy like Russia." Yeah, that's right. And but that's a really interesting thought though that you brought up here, John, because like what Ukraine is doing is decentralizing and using free market principles in order to accelerate their progress, and Russia just can't seem to get there, which is a good thing. They keep using this command structure, which is good in focusing, but it's bad in every other way. So yeah. Um, yeah. Okay, so Alex Kilnoff, board member, says the effect of a falling ruble will be country crumbling and mass protests, not about the war, about ability to survive when the fund and of national wealth ends. Okay, so the economy is in bad shape. There are all kinds of signs that I keep seeing that just are bad signs, worse signs. People stealing butter because the price of butter and potatoes has gone up so high, and that's not going to. But I don't know at what point that's going to trigger the the Russian population to rise up. I can't predict that. And so you hear all this hyperbolic language about the Russian economy collapse. It's not collapsing. Not that I can tell. It's in bad shape. It's ailing. There are problems, but when it collapses, we'll all know about it, and it'll be on regular news if something like that happens. Um, yeah. General Kellogg is wrong. Yesterday, Jake Bro and Georgie said it would take at least 1.5 million soldiers to freeze war and create a demilitarized zone. Yeah, I don't think a demilitarized zone is likely, or in like, how would you actually maintain that? Like the number of soldiers it would take to maintain some kind of zone is just astronomical. So you needed after World War II a ratio of 1 to 40 to hold Germany. just after the capitulation. Now, if they're in some kind of active hostile posture, it might be 1 to 25, one soldier for 25 people in the population. So a demilitarized zone, trying to hold that off, that seems like a not so great plan as well. But we'll see how this all works out. Um, so more than 1,000-kilometer line, yeah, it's not Korea, right? I mean, this is a very tricky thing to try to be doing. Russia has oil and natural gas. China and India will buy it and resell it. China's economy is doing fine. Okay, so let's talk about oil. So you know that oil and gas are, Russia's economy is predicated on oil and natural gas. A third of it is based off of Russian fossil fuels. Like that's their main export. They're like Russia's more like Saudi Arabia than most other countries. Um, and Trump wants to drill more oil and export as much natural gas as humanly possible, which is going to have an effect on the cost, not just here, but worldwide. The cost goes down as the supply goes up. And that's going to so if you're Captain Planet, you won't like this. I get that. But if you want to see Russia hurt economically, Trump's domestic plan will hurt Russia economically just because it's his domestic plan. So that's what we're looking at. I mean, there's so many factors that are the headwinds are pushing against Putin more than helping him with all the international events, in my estimation, from that which I can see. And tell me if I'm wrong. Well, I could be missing something, and if I am, tell me. Okay, you want to know how it is? I lived it behind the Iron Curtain, Czechoslovakia, under SSS or SSR lines for food, bananas once a year, power outages, coal holiday. Yeah, I mean it's terrible. I didn't live in that kind of scenario. I've been to 4 post-Soviet states after the fall of communism, and heard stories and listened to people. And yeah, I mean, I get it. Okay, Georgian president is like Israel president, ceremonial. Yeah, she's ceremonial. She's at least got some guts to be out there trying to be out there with the protesters. I saw that. And what's going on in Georgia is they're overplaying their hand because they think they have power after stealing the election. And yeah, it's a bad overplay of their hand. So yeah. Anyway, if Trump drills and Saudi Arabia also follows through with selling more, that together will drop oil to 70 or less a barrel. Yeah. If Saudi Arabia gets on board with that, Saudi Arabia alone could do it, right? But Trump's going to be doing it as well, or allowing it. I mean, allowing drilling on federal land, which I know liberals in the United States are going to be like, hey, that's terrible. But okay, again, we're only looking at Ukraine here, and the way that it's affecting Ukraine is going to be a net positive. The more energy, and that's also going to help the American economy because energy costs are half of what's ailing us right now, or a huge chunk of what's ailing us right now. Which country is supporting Syria, the Syria faction that took Aleppo? So I watched a couple of documentaries over Thanksgiving about what was going on with Bashar al-Assad. I know this sounds terrible. I mean, last year I was watching, instead of watching football, I was watching documentaries about the former Yugoslavia, like a 3-part documentary about how that collapsed, because I'm kind of nerdy like that, right? Um, so I don't know how to answer exactly. So what we didn't want was another scenario where something like ISIS was forming, and so that would be a bad scenario. And I'm not sure exactly that I understand what these rebels are, because the documentaries I was watching were a little dated. Uh, Assad is a bad guy. Assad will indiscriminately kill civilians and targeting military, kill civilians just without even thinking about it. It doesn't matter as long as he can hang on to power. But he fled to Moscow. Like, I don't know if he's planning to stay in Moscow or what, but he's a bad dude. Now, so his military was bad. ISIS before that was bad, and Assad is an interesting cat. He's not actually, like, he's a branch off of Islam. Like, you have Sunni and Shia, and he has a something. I'm trying to remember the name of the sect, but they're almost seen by Muslims as not real Muslim, almost like this. I'm trying to give an analogy here in the way that Mormons are seen by Protestants and Catholics. They're not quite the same thing as Protestants and Catholics, which are the two major divisions within Christianity. Um, Alawat, Alawite. Yeah. Thank you for putting that in the comments. So what he is a little bit different. It's almost like a yeah. So you get the idea. So there are um, Islamic factors that are pushing on this as well. And yeah, so it's a really interesting scene what's happening in Syria, but this just puts extra pressure on the Russians for having to contend with what's going on in Syria right now. Again, they don't want to lose their base in Syria. Kelly Parks just popped up. Americans were surrounded in the Battle of the Bulge. Germans sent a message demanding surrender. We sent back nuts. Uh, 40s for go blank. Yeah, actually, there was a comment, Kelly, about that. It wasn't that. It was the German who heard that asked nuts. I don't know nuts. I don't understand. And I believe he said, "Go to heck." This is a family friendly channel. Yeah, so yeah, that was the qualifying line. Rip Ripiata Ripiacha says it's possible that the barrel of oil drops below 50 or even 30 or below. If price of oil really drops, how much time does Putin have? Greetings from Finland, the unfortunate neighbor of Russia. Today, I think, is the anniversary of the Winter War. By the way, if you know of a documentary about the Winter War, that's the next thing on my list. That's what I want to watch next to understand what happened in Finland. So if anybody knows that, put that in the chat because I would like to find that out. But yes, if it drops to 50 or something crazy like 30 or something like that, it's going to really accelerate Putin's compromised uh, economic position because again, so much of that is predicated on oil revenue, and even if you know China, Brazil, India, even if they're all still soaking up as much oil as they can, when it drops, it won't matter. Like they they can get it from elsewhere for the dropped rate. It won't matter if it's coming from Russia. So okay, yeah, but it will accelerate it. But I can't tell you it'll take this long or that long or anything along those lines. Okay, let's see. Russian oil can be produced under its own pressure, much cheaper than U.S. light oil. Yeah, but can it actually get where it needs to go? That's half the problem. Donald LeBlanc says maybe asked already any possibility of individual European countries putting troops into Ukraine along the Moldova and Belarusian borders. So why would it matter? Like if they're not going to do anything, that why mass the troops there? Um, Now, there was a question about putting them in Ukraine. I don't know that there's any appetite for that sort of escalation from the Biden administration. No, actually, let me say it like this. I'm certain that there's no appetite for that sort of escalation under the Biden administration. But who knows what Trump will or won't do in bargaining? I've maintained this all along. He's a wild card. He could be bad for Ukraine. He could be good for Ukraine. We just don't know. We know he'll do whatever it is that makes him look awesome. Like that's what he's going for. Okay. Too many big oil companies are funding Trump, and the goal will be to drive up demand, not increase supply. Well, yeah, except that Trump wants to release the spigots because he wants to see the economy flourish, which will lower energy prices will cause that. So, okay, this December is the 35th anniversary of the collapse of the Soviet Union. Yeah, think about that, the collapse of the Soviet Union that time ago, and the fascinating differences of what happened in different countries as they've been released, as they become more Western or they become more, as Russia has, more authoritarian. Alex Kilnov says accessible Russian oil is running out in a few years. Western technologies will be needed to get to the oil after that. I hope we're smarter the next time when providing this tech. Well, there's somebody that's going to want to make a profit by selling them to them, but hopefully they will be smarter. Um, I watched an English a documentary called "The World at War" about World War II some years ago. Cannot recommend it enough. Not much about Finland though, but it's worth a watch. Okay, well, thanks for the suggestion. Still looking at something for the Winter War. See what I can find. The price of oil, that's just a deficit in my understanding of exactly what that was like. I know that that Finland gave Russia quite a headache in that winter war, um, and but I don't know the details about it. People do not realize that almost everything is trucked in the U.S. Small prices in fuel make big differences at Walmart's shelf prices. Yeah, so we do use trains, but we're not nearly as reliant on trains as we are on trucks on our major highways. So that does have a significant effect. Um, let's see here. Break even for fracking is at $50 per barrel. I'm not sure what the break even is. That's not something that's in my uh, understanding or things that I have read lately. I've been very focused on other things. Speaking of other things, what do you want to talk about Georgia, about Russia, about whatever else, whatever Syria, whatever other headaches are going on? Because there's something really significant going on here with Putin. And man, he must have gone from a very high to a very low, and that's assuming that he's still with us, like, the conspiracy people are talking about. I'm assuming that that's the case until I have some other evidence to the contrary, but it's been pretty significant, how things have shifted here lately, and it's not just the escalation from the long range weapons and the ICBM and that sort of thing. It's a significant shift of things that look like they could have broken for him, that look like they may very well break against him. Okay. Professor Gerdes, do you think that the hybrid warfare on the West will hit a point that Article 5 is triggered? And at what point do you think it will be? I hope not. I don't want to see that happen. I want to see the West simply provide Ukraine with what they need so they can back Russia off without having a world war. But it seems like Western leaders' decision making has been almost calculated to make it worse by appeasing and inviting more conflict. And so they go and do, like, I don't know if the DHL thing with Lithuania just recently was related to the previous DHL thing, but that seems like a really bad way of inviting more conflict. Um, so I hope we don't get to that point. Uh, don't support rats says, I'm most curious over the Kadavarites and Azerbaijanis. Keep reporting. Putin recently visited there, and their news made marked change. Hard to find information there. I don't know enough about that either. In my estimation, it would be wonderful if something kicked off there to keep Putin's attention focused over there instead of in Ukraine. But we'll see. Cheryl Waitley says, "World on Fire," the BBC PBS series about World War II. Yeah, yeah, that was good stuff too. I watched that. Um, Article 3 was triggered by Russian shenanigans in Europe, but NATO has no appetite for invoking Article 5. I think that's fair. NATO has proven that for all their talk, they don't actually want to enforce anything. And they're starting to get the message and realize slowly that they're going to have to put on their big boy pants and actually man up. And yeah, but they're coming to that, at least mercifully. Um, let's see. NATO needs to update their treaty to induce hybrid warfare. Yeah, to include hybrid warfare and how they respond to it. I think that's fair. They do need to update their treaty and focus on things like that, because the Russians just keep doing stuff. John Schmidt here in North Dakota, one bottleneck to producing more oil is hiring people that are drug free. Need more people to work in oil field to produce more oil. Well, the supply and demand issue will take care of that. I mean, as far as getting employees there, and it was like that until we got to the Biden administration. They put the kibosh on it, and then things dried up significantly. But yes, that will be an issue of finding good people who want to work. But when the price is what it is, I mean, like, this is why I was just looking at this guy that went to the Russian army, and he was, saying that it's not about patriotism. We just people are there because they wanted to make money, and the average life expectancy is about a month, maybe. Like he's back after a year. So if he's back after a year, that means if the average life expectancy is a month, there are people that have made it a week or two. I mean, that's right? I mean, just to counterbalance if there's an average. So, wow. Okay. NATO has a committee looking into hybrid warfare. Currently, it's an Article 4 event. Okay. More than 400,000 Soviet soldiers died in the winter and continuation wars. Yeah, I understand that they just got bludgeoned in the process. Like Finland was freaking tough. And they didn't think that Finland was going to be that tough, but the Finns actually were far more formidable than they thought. But they apparently haven't learned any lessons with that. Russian oil and gas system is less tech oriented, judging how often they employ low wage workers from Central Asia. And that's going to be their path forward, is to try to draw in foreigners to come work on their oil fields and other factories and things along those lines. That's their path forward. Um, Peacock Pareka was director of Winter War. Okay, I'll look that up. After war, General Enroute was interviewed by the BBC. I'm sure you're going to tell me something more about that, so I'll see if I can find that as well. All right, what other questions do you have for me? I've now gone 36 minutes. I want to be done in maybe 10 minutes or so, and I'll answer anything I can possibly answer that you have questions about. Of all the headaches, like my titles have been for the last couple of days, like this is bad for Putin, Putin's headaches. Like there are a lot of things that are just going very weird. Don supports rats asked how is Blue Sky going? Let me look that up. Blue Sky is actually phenomenal compared to Twitter in the interactions, and fewer bots and things along those lines. And if I look at Blue Sky, I now have eight. It's fascinating. I have 8,000 followers on Blue Sky in 2 weeks, and lots of interaction about people asking really good questions about this, as opposed to 1.6 thousand followers in 2 years on Twitter. So, okay, and with harassment and people fighting with me about stupid stuff. Cheryl says, I'm seeing two movies about the Finnish Winter War, Tal Talvers Talvoista and the Winter War. I haven't seen them. Okay, well, I'll be looking for that. David Loy said, I'd be interested in the 60 billion allocated to Ukraine. How much of it was spent inside the U.S., updating the U.S. Army weapon systems that needed updating anyway? So a portion of that has been spent, but like people overdo that. I find it frustrating when people say, well, this is all staying in the US anyway. No, we are spending 60 billion. That we're going to have to pay back for. Even if we're spending some of that to update stuff, it's not like we're just evening out somehow. It's still costing. It is costing less, but it's still costing. So we have to be fair about how we explain that sort of thing. Um, keep the old Foggy says, according to Russia, Ukraine self-defense is escalation. Expand. Yeah. Anytime that they try to defend themselves, this how can they do this? They're hitting into our territory. How can um, because you started a war. That's how it works. It's like a bully saying, I can hit you, but you can't hit me back. That how can you dare do that? Um, Finland is not to be messed with. It appears that way. The 1 ruble for Star Child. Who's Star Child? Somebody's arguing as if it looks like there's a troll named Star Child. Good job, Ivan. 1 ruble for you. Too bad it won't buy you anything from the dollar store. No, but 106 or so rubles. No, well, a dollar store is now $1.25. So maybe 150 rubles, something like that. Okay, World at War. As a kid, I also can recommend it. Can't recommend it enough, rather. They cover Winter War in at least part of one episode. All right. What do you think about the election in Romania? where the shenanigans by the pro-Russian candidate who was pushed on TikTok. Well, they're reviewing it. Like, did he break election rules in the way that he went about doing that by using TikTok? But again, I just don't understand how you got these guys from these obscure parties that no one ever heard of. It just doesn't register to my mind. But of course, our system in the US doesn't register to European mind. So, okay. Um, let's see what else here. Make Ukraine great again. Make Ukraine great again. That's right. Um, let's see. Any recommendations for Sino-Soviet war documentaries? Japan is rearming. Yeah, they actually are. They're worried about it. And after Japan was going to be making a deal about putting things on islands between Japan and Taiwan, Russia was the one arguing back about it. Like, again, if you're now Russia has this like we're the greatest, but we're embattled on all sides. Well, they are now, which they weren't embattled on all sides back in 2021, but they kind of caused the embattlement on all sides. Nicholas says, if the Assad government is in real trouble, do you think Russia will be forced to deliver military resources from Ukraine? Um, so I don't know if they're going to pull them from Ukraine, but if taking anything from Russia's resources to help Syria is a net positive for Ukraine, just because. But I doubt that they're going to take anything from like the front line. But maybe some missiles or planes or whatever are going to be repurposed to Syria that wouldn't be used otherwise. Wow, there's 1,000 of you out here. I just saw that there's 1,000 people in this chat right now. That's pretty significant. And thank you for the likes that are popping up as well. I appreciate that. Wow, 1,000. I don't pay close attention to that. I'm trying to answer your questions, so that's unusual to see. But okay, here we are. More questions. People forget that Russia has had a strong NATO neighbor only 4 kilometers away since NATO began in Alaska. That's right. I mean, NATO is right on their border, not just in Finland, but in the Baltic states and in Alaska. And so, like, what this idea that NATO is not there has been kind of a ruse. What do you make of Turkey saying that they won't support any peace agreements where Ukraine doesn't get their lands back? I think that's awesome. Now, I'm not a great fan of Erdogan, but Erdogan is about Erdogan, just like Trump is about Trump. And because of that, he's going to look out for Turkey's interest. And Turkey's interest is not that Russia becomes a dominant force in the region. So that's a very good thing that Turkey made that kind of statement. So thank you for all the hearts, the likes that are popping up here. I appreciate that. John McElravy, Russia leans to leans to the left geographically anyway. Yeah, and that's correct. They if you look at the population demographics, there's a lot of empty country out there. Um, let's see. Now they have another NATO country on their border. Remember, Turkey is a host nation. They are the closest of allies to closest of close allies in Europe. Yeah, they're a really interesting hybrid. Like Turkey will break with some countries, but they're also like for Turkey will be kind of against the West in supporting Israel, but they'll be kind of with the West in opposing Syria because you just have to understand where the interests lie, and it's a really fascinating thing when you start seeing who backs who. It's just fascinating to watch. So I watched another documentary on Thanksgiving about this Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Qatar. And UAE and Saudi don't like Qatar, and vice versa. And Qatar is kind of supported by Iran, and Saudi is the competitor to Iran. And like when you start to see those dynamics, a lot of what's happening starts to make sense. Okay. Oil drilling in Serbia can be easier when Siberia can be easier when the tundra melts or worse. Don't know. I mean, that's not my expertise. And so I admit my ignorance when I have it. I would imagine it would be harder, but that's just me. How can donated Dutch mine hunter get through the Bosphorus considering the Montreal? I don't even know how to pronounce that. I've read it. Convention UK already tried. I don't know if Turkey let them through, Turkey let them through, but Turkey controls it. And so that's one of the reasons that Russia has to listen to Turkey, because Turkey's not that big comparatively, but they also control the access to the Black Sea. And so Russia wants to stay on good relations with Turkey. Yeah. Worse is mud. Yeah, that's right. Turkey will always be aware of Russia, get influence in the Dardanelles. Um, okay. I mean, smaller ships can get their way through the Danube. It's harder to get through the Danube. It's not impossible, but smaller vessels can certainly. I I've told you before. Almost lost my shoe in the Danube because I tried to, I dipped my foot in it just to say that I had, right, and then I kind of slipped a little bit and almost lost my shoe in the mud. That was not one of my brighter moments. Okay, Siberia is mostly gas reserves. When it melts, the gas releases and forms sinkholes, but not much network to deliver it regardless. So that's interesting. That's news to me. Okay, another super chat just popped up. Do you think that fighting in Syria will cause a tidal wave of refugees? Wow, that's a great question. It's not something that I had thought about before, but that is actually happening. There are refugees already running from what's going on right now. I don't know how massive it will be or what kind of pressure it'll put on its neighbors, but it could. It could very well. I mean, historically, that kind of thing does happen significantly. Um, let's see. Russia is in trouble. Ruble collapsing. Setbacks in Ukraine, Syria, Georgia, Mali, etc. Tide of war changing. Well, so I mean that's exactly what the premise is here. It's that what's happening in Russia is actually a lot of things have just looked like they were going the right way, and the tide seems to have reversed. And it's Putin's got a lot more headaches than he had just a few weeks ago. That's my argument. And like Georgia was an unforced error. The Georgian um, parliament that was, it looks like the Georgian Dream Party stole the election from everything that we can detect in Western press. And then they just push too hard. Like when you have too much power, this is my fear for the Republicans now. And I'm, as you know, I'm a Republican. I'm a Reagan Republican, right? I would have preferred to see a split government where the one party controls the House and the other party controls the Senate. Because when you have the president, the House, and the Senate, you tend to overplay your hand. This is what happened with Obama. The Democrats controlled the presidency, the House, and the Senate, and overplayed their hand into Obamacare, which created a massive backlash. So the same kind of dynamic is playing out in Georgia right now, where they stole the election and now they're overplaying their hand and they're getting a huge reaction from what's going on. Eh, uh, where the people are coming out for what looks like a Maidan. And so that's why I'm even thinking it feels like a Ruski spring. It's just so many things happening so all over the place. Hello, King Raccoon. Nice to see you as well. Um, all right, you bet, but so many right-wing Americans went MAGA and can't watch. I can't watch that point of view. I just find it so flawed. It is flawed. I mean, it's like let's sit down and reason together and work together and find our commonalities. We don't have to agree on everything, but we can work on some things that where we have common interests. The idea that we just have to fight is kind of stupid. I just find it so flawed and not something I gain from because he says everything, all followers are for different reasons. All right. Obamacare was great for me, cheaper than Medicare. Okay. I have no idea what professor is talking about regarding ACA. No, so what I was talking about with the ACA was it was one-sided entirely. Not a single Republican voted for that law. And because they had the presidency, the House, and the Senate, they were able to ram it through. If you are able to ram something through, the temptation is to ram something through. And this is what's happening with the Georgia Dream Party right now in Georgia, where they could have just been kind of tight lipped about it and just, yeah, maybe we'll get to European integration. But they said, we're not doing that till 2028 and just stiff armed them. And in doing that, they just created a huge mess for themselves. But it's easy to do that when you have all the power, when you feel like you have all the cards. Okay. Um, Sorry, it was a lot of compromise. It was not rammed through. Ichabod says, okay, Ichabod, you got to go look how many Republicans actually voted for it. Zero. So that was my point. But this isn't a forum to talk about the ACA. This is a forum to talk about what's going on in Ukraine. And I was trying to use that as an example, which people want to talk about the ACA. ACA is not something that we need to discuss anymore here. Okay, so what's happening in Georgia is because they have the power, they're pushing it through. What's happening in Romania is really odd to me. And I'm not sure how or why people there were so affected by this guy with his Russian leaning talking points. And if anybody understands that, I would absolutely love to hear what you have to say about that. Um, okay, Ukraine can't give away territory according to their constitution. Yes, there's a BBC reporter asking Zelensky about this. If you could be in NATO and just give away that territory, but the rest of the country, would you do that? And it's like, why would you even be asking him those questions? Like he's like, but I can't. I couldn't even if I wanted to. What's going on? Do you think the election results in the U.S. are a consequence of decreasing education in the U.S.? Same in Romania with Georgescu. No, I think the election results in the U.S., and this is my personal biased view because this is where I come from. Now, if you're on the left side of the spectrum, you might not see it the same way if you're on the right. But what I saw was an academic study showing that the greatest correlate was anti woke or anti racism, which doesn't mean pro racism. It means they don't see it the same way of being like your group identity is all that matters. They see on the right, they see more of a Martin Luther King judge people by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. Why are you talking about group identity, group identity, group identity all the time? So I think there was a reaction to that more than anything else. And I think the second big thing was the economy. And while the economy is working well with the stock market, the inflation that we've experienced over the last 4 years, I'm still angry every time I go to the grocery store. So it's happening here, even if it's happening at a greater rate elsewhere, but it's happening here enough that I think those two issues are primary in what's going on with what happened with the election with Trump. And some people just whether they there's a group, a MAGA group that really likes Trump no matter what, and then there's a group that were holding their nose and saying he's not Biden and or not Biden's heir because obviously Biden left and we had a different candidate, but there's a group that were holding their nose and doing that. So I think that's what happened in the U.S. election. Um, okay. I guess some Americans would find help. We're still talking about the ACA here, people. I just said we're not talking about the ACA. This is about Ukraine. I was using that as an example of overdoing something. And I shouldn't have even mentioned the particular policy because that just inflamed things somehow. That's not what I was going for. Um, because people hear the name Romania over and over, it legitimizes in your mind. So when you don't follow politics, it's a name regardless of policies. I'm not sure what that means. Um, let's see. Do you think Russia will be bankrupt after the war? Russia will never be bankrupt because they sit on this large gas station, right? After the war, I would hope that they would pay reparations to Ukraine and maybe through the oil and gas. But I don't think they'll be bankrupt after the war. I think there may be an economic collapse of some sort, but they'll get back on their feet eventually because they do have natural resources. Um, do not be angry over inflation on food. In former times, speculation on food was forbidden. You should remember this. And the US began to do this. What? What are we talking about? Okay. Um, also, the bro podcast, like Reagan, social media podcasts were missed by keys by Lickman. Yeah. Lickman got it wrong, and he's still trying to figure out quite what he got wrong. Okay. Anyway, we are now at the point where I was trying to get to this done within an hour. I'll answer three more questions, any three questions, and we'll be done. Okay. Um, I'm from Canada. I'm so worried that the US will stop support to Ukraine. Do you think Europe can pick up the slack if Trump does? Yes, there are multiple scenarios by which that can happen. Okay, here's scenario number one. Trump continues to support or supports more. Scenario number two, Trump decides that he's going to not support Ukraine, in which case you have A and B. So, 2, 2A is that Trump is going to, I'm cutting them off. Europe picks up the slack, and the homegrown weaponry within Ukraine just has to be paid for by Europeans or other, others that are helping, and they can keep going with the stuff that's paid for, the missiles, the drones, those kinds of things that they're building inland. The other one is that the Europeans go um, transactionally. Trump, we realize that you are not going to continue to do this, but let's make a deal. Can we buy your weaponry? And I'm pretty sure that Trump would want to sell the weaponry. And yeah, I think there's a deal that scenario number three, that a deal can be made there. Okay. Next question. Professor is going to be the only one surprised when Trump gives a store away to Russia. Yeah, I would be surprised if he did give the store away to Russia. That's correct, because I just don't see that here, because that would make him look weak, and that's not what Trump is wanting to do. He's not trying to look weak. Last question: what will Trump do in relation to sanctions on Russia? That is what to watch. It's a good question, because we just don't know that yet. There's some speculation that he would lift it, but he wouldn't lift it as outside of part of a significant deal in order to be the deal maker, right? I mean, that's his whole shtick. So, um, could they be lifted? Yes, but he would want to get something significant for that, in my estimation. Okay, I've been here for about an hour. Thank you to the 1,000 of you that are out here watching this. That's pretty awesome that you care enough to spend your Saturday. Well, I was going to say Saturday morning, because that's what it is here. It might be Saturday evening where you are or something, but to spend that time with me. Thank you for your time, and thank you for the likes and the shares and the subscribes. More than anything, thank you all for being the kind of people that care about Ukraine. I really do appreciate it. Bye bye.